I welcome David sir for this podcast. This is a kind of a podcast where I'm actually talking to somebody who is educating folks on the cloud aspects because not everybody has a clear understanding of what students require, and also there is a different requirement for the professional world because there is a lot of jargons that we talk today, like okay,
Mhm.
what about the Kubernetes, how to scale this, auto scaling that, this. I don't care because tomorrow's world is going to be less complex but more towards the business aspect. So less plumbing, more profits. That's what we are all
Yep.
talking about. So I'm here with David sir, teaching myself what is it all about, just architecting a solution using DevOps, as well as minting money and understanding the process of architecting such kind of an architecture. So I welcome David sir. Thank you so much for giving me this podcast. It means a lot.
You're welcome.
Yes. So let's just start with an intro. Like, what was your journey as a professional? Because not everybody has the same old way of understanding what is this DevOps and the things like that. And I just wanted to know, like, what made you think that DevOps is one of the most disruptive industry that, according to your experience, told you
Yep.
that like this is what is going to be somewhat most tedious but yet most energetic feel like, which is more enriching in knowledge and the things like that. So I wanted to
Yeah.
understand what's your journey as a professional.
Yeah. So basically, I started about 15 years ago as a Java developer when I graduated from college. 15, probably more than 15 now, but don't want to tell that. I did Java and some Python as well for like a number of years. And then I came to Ireland 10 years ago, actually, this month. And like started working as Java developer as well, first in insurance, then in payments. And at some point, I remember I was at like 5 a.m. in the morning in an insurance company here in Ireland, making a deployment, like, deploying a new version of the software. And I was like, there must be a better way than just, come here at 5 a.m. and create a very stressful situation for deploying an application, which we know in 2 hours is going to be needed by 400 people in a call center. So we really need to do better than that. And that kind of started giving me the what do we do to improve that. Then, like almost a year later, I was starting to get a bit itch of Java. Like, this sort of like I've been doing Java for too long and I've been doing the same thing for too long. And I got the opportunity to write a book on Node.js and microservices, which is something I was always, very curious about. And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? So let's do it. And basically, I wrote a book about Node.js and microservices, and people will be like, "Oh my god, a book!" But it's really not that much. So many of you might have a blog. Writing a book is taking that blog and making it a bit more, nice looking, and pack it as a book with a publisher and sell it. That's it. I mean, it doesn't require like you having deep expertise or something like that. Like you are writing a book for people in your level, not for people above your level. So when you are learning a new technology, it's the perfect time to write a book. Otherwise, what happened to me is the second book I wrote on DevOps. I would not like to call myself an expert, but I was very experienced on DevOps. And the people who is reading the book is like, oh my God, this is too advanced. This is too advanced. And it's like, well, that's probably the point I missed on the second one. But then back to the first one. So that book actually got me a job in a company called Nearform, which is one of the biggest Node.js companies in the world. Like, in fact, at some point, I think something like 40 to 60% of the technical steering committee of Node.js was working in Nearform. And I got the opportunity in there to play with DevOps in a project, specifically DevSecOps. And I came across Kubernetes and I got like, sucked into Kubernetes, containers, all the cloud technologies. And like suddenly to me was like, this is exactly what we need. Because being realistic, before the cloud and before containers, building microservices were not feasible. Like you will require a huge amount of automation to avoid the operational complexity to eat your time. Like if you're running 40 microservices and you don't have an automated way of deploying them, like you really are going to suffer because you will have teams that will just only care about deployments. So with Kubernetes, that went away. Like like you just write your manifest, configure the values, and that's exactly what what gives you the automation. So you don't really need to spend a lot of time on deploying them. Like it's a one-shot deployment, one-shot rollback, which is the perfect situation. And I don't want anybody to ask about the database because that's a different business. But in general, that gave me the, oh my God, this is exactly what everybody needs. But then, of course, Kubernetes is complex. So started looking more into the serverless world as well, something like Google Cloud Run, Knative, in the AWS world, ECS, Fargate, Lambda, and so on. And I think you were spot on before, earlier on, Vishwas. My feeling is that the world to come, or the time to come, is going to be less complex about technology and more complex about business. But you will need to be able to go down the complexities of technology to be able to survive, because, you know, like I've seen many companies which are like, we don't want to hire DevOps because they're super hard to hire at the moment and super expensive. Let's go serverless. And that is actually a very, very dangerous corner. So yeah. And,
Yeah,
and then, you know, yeah.
You can continue. You can continue.
No, I was going to say, and that brings me to today, which I joined a company called Manacao 3 months ago, actually, next week. And yeah, I mean, I joined as a principal engineer, and my main focus here is DevOps around finance, investment banking, asset managers, and, you know, like it's kind of an industry which is moving towards cloud and moving towards container. I was surprised because I worked in banking like 4 years ago, 6 years ago, actually. And they were so not ready for containers and so not ready for modernization. And now I jump back into banks, and it's like, oh my God, everything is in containers, everything is serverless, everything is, you know, like moving towards like a better world and an easier place. So yeah, that's me today.
Yeah, you got a very apt point, because throughout my life as an engineer, like I was always finding some solution which is more easier. But at the end of the day, when you see the complexity that goes behind, and you are supposed to respect that and learn that and
Yeah,
deploy something, there comes a point where you also come to know that there is something fishy here. What can I change? And something
yeah,
has to evolve. And I feel that probably that evolution is a blessing and a curse for the DevOps, because probably there is going to be a lot of lazy devs like me who can find good solution, but at the end of the day, there can be anything. So my
yeah.
question, the next question is, what's your ultimate fear in the world that is taking more towards the jargons? Like we are talking more of this ML, AI, and one click rollback and one click deployment and all these, like we are paying DevOps engineer to get me that sort of flexibility. So
Yeah,
kind of a situation like that, because AI is something which is crucial, because we talk about model versioning, data meshes today. There was a service mesh which was pretty fine, but it didn't do the
yeah.
compute. But today there's a data mesh which is supposed to compute something. So I wanted to know, what's your ultimate fear when you think of an evolving technology that we are talking about today? Jargons also
Yes.
included. Yeah.
Yeah. So like like if you see my LinkedIn profile, you might think like, oh, this guy is you know, like on the last technology beats always, because I'm always, you know, moving to Kubernetes, now serverless, now, you know, like different technologies. But the reality is, I think we are going to be stuck where we are for a number of years regarding evolution. Okay, I'll give you some areas. So you like set up a company from scratch, and you have a product that you want to deploy in AWS or GCP or Azure. You need DevOps. And if AWS, Azure, or GCP sells you, oh, you don't need DevOps, you just need to use this service, like, you completely and grossly misunderstood DevOps, because DevOps is not somebody automating a pipeline. DevOps is somebody aligning your company with the cloud tools to be efficient. So yes, I will go and create a pipeline which allows you to click once and deploy everywhere sort of a scenario. But basically, you are missing the point of a DevOps engineer is doing that, but actually it's also helping my company to be more efficient. And I can give you one example of that. So when you have developers which are not working with operations, you have a silo, and you might have a developer building something which might be fantastic. You show that to all the stakeholders, they go crazy. And then you try to deploy that into production, and suddenly what you just deployed is stateful, cannot be deployed in Kubernetes easily, or it sends back a payload of 2 GB. I've seen that. and it doesn't really work well with the modern cloud technologies, or it's hard to be containerized. That is because, again, like, the company grossly misunderstood DevOps. Like, I mean, big time. I always like to make a comparison. So the Paris-Dakar rally? There's a rally who goes from Paris into Dakar, and I think, or like, they go on stages and they go through the desert, and every single year like 3 or 4 people die in this rally, which is crazy. So a few years back, I saw an interview. I think it was Carlos Sainz, the Spanish driver, the Spanish, I think it was F1 or rally pilot. And basically, somebody asking, why don't you use a most modern car to go through the desert? And the answer was, like, I drive a Jeep, or I don't know which car he drives, where everything is analog and everything is mechanical, because if I get struck in the desert, I can actually disassemble, like, turn away the car, turn apart the car, fix the issue, and continue the race. If I was driving a Tesla or a most modern car, which I cannot repair with my own hands, I'll be dead. So that's the difference between life and death. So I like to compare a startup or a company journey to DevOps to a rally. Basically, what you end up is, you need to have somebody which, when worse it's coming, and it will come, knows how to disassemble the car, fix the issue, and then assemble it again. But the reality is, your developers, your drivers, will actually know exactly something is wrong, and you will have somebody on board which is going to be able to fix it. And yes, it's fancy, like, the interface is the same. You press the accelerator and the car goes forward, and you press the brake and the car brakes. But the reality is, whatever is behind that, it's more complex than just 2 or 3 pedals, which is what usually is seen from above. Like, oh my God, why so complex? Like, we just deploy your rollback. Well, there's a big number of factors to take into consideration. That's my take. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because we are not pioneering in culture. We are actually destroying an worst scenario, and we are not adhering to the fact that every day DevOps is a lesson. DevOps
Yeah.
is never an destination. It's always that marathon which just keeps rolling over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And I just feel that. So I wanted to know, because you brought an app point, even in your book, you have a different definition for the DevOps, because you talk about the evolution of adapting from waterfall to whatever we are now trying to build towards. And you also make a point about, like, I don't know what happens tomorrow as well in your book. So I just wanted to understand, like, what's an app definition for a DevOps? Because nobody has an app definition for DevOps. Because I've been working a lot on that aspect these days, but I have not yet found a definition of DevOps. So according to you, what is a DevOps culture all about? And probably a DevOps as well. Yeah.
A good colleague of mine, Alex Knoll, actually, hello, Alex, you probably will see this, has the perfect definition, in my opinion, of DevOps. So you draw a line in the business. Above, you have business. Below, you have technology. A management consultant will be working very close to that line from the business point of view. A DevOps consultant will be working very close to that line from the technology point of view. So it's somebody who can understand the business and can actually get down to technology and translate those business requirements, as of, we need to actually deploy the software like 11 times a day, into what technology artifacts do we need or are best for us to exercise. So that is what my definition of a DevOps is. It will be to technology what a management consultant is to business.
Yeah.
Does that sound
Yeah,
reasonable?
that's true. That's true. Because a lot of times it's also about, like, okay, you have this culture inculcated, but are the people ready to get in? Because that's what I feel. So you have seen different organizations worked on different things. So I just wanted to understand, like, have you ever come across a situation where you have said, let's not transform right now, let's take some time and let's evolve over a course of time? Because in your note forms talk, I think the speaker bought a book called as Accelerate, and he tells about, like, how it's all about evolving through a culture, how you're actually catering to the needs of the software engineering and the things like that. But I wanted to understand, like, when do we have to say no for a transformation in an organization? Because culture keeps evolving. We get engrossed about somebody doing a lot of things. Like, Chaos Monkey works fine in Netflix, but doesn't work fine in my startup. If I find it very interesting, learn about it, hire some good Netflix engineers. So, what is it all about today when we are talking
Yeah,
about stopping a transformation for a while and evolving over a course of time?
yeah. So it's actually a very good question. I think every company should, like, I mean, there's a very easy thing here. Like, you either move forward or you die. You might not die immediately because you are a big bank or you are a big, company, or you are like, a massive organization which has enough resilience. But I don't really see a small startup or a mid-sized company who can take the luxury of saying, no, 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 we are gonna just sit back and relax and move slower. Like, in my opinion, there are companies who are not yet ready for kind of digital transformation or for DevOps or for, sort of this level of agility. In general, these are non-technological based companies. So if you take insurance, if you take, I don't know, like, procurement, um, that type of companies like property management, they don't have a digital base. They actually don't work with technology. They could be working on printed paper, and I've seen that, and still do very well. So they don't have the skills in the company. They don't have the people to support the transformation, and they don't have, the required kind of mindset to do it. So I will not recommend anybody in that stage to just jump into DevOps or jump into this sort of, kind of new world. But any company who is a technological based company or a technology based company, like, I really don't see how they will survive in the next 2 or 3 years without being, like, take COVID, okay? Take COVID, for example, for shopping. Like, I live in Ireland, I live in Dublin, and there is like one massive retailer, which is Calargos. I don't know if I can tell names, but I will tell names. That when COVID started, obviously you couldn't just jump into the shop and like buy something because you were not allowed to go into a shop. And I was shocked to find that in the beginning of COVID, they won't do home deliveries. I mean, I was trying to buy something and no, sorry, we can't deliver home. Like, we don't have that, we don't do that. And they quickly moved into this new world of, yes, you can buy it, and then we deliver it to your place in like 5 days or something like that. I think they did, but something went wrong and they were like a few months without it. And now, like, many companies are actually revisiting their model, because what's the point of having a massive building with lots of stock in the middle of a shopping center, which might be very expensive, when you can buy something today and have it tomorrow at your doorstep, having the warehouse somewhere in the middle of Ireland, which is like probably a quarter of the price you're paying for a warehouse in Dublin. So that sort of transformation, I think it's very valuable. So COVID actually gave a lesson to many companies to actually move into this more kind of digitalized space, or more into the online food. I remember before COVID, many restaurants were complaining about Just Eat. Oh, they're charging like 20-30%. But realistically, Just Eat has enabled people to set up a kitchen without having to set up a restaurant outside of the city, and then deliver food through Just Eat, saving them like thousands of euros. Yes, of course, the restaurant who is in the city center of Dublin and wants to just live off takeaways, it's going to have a hard time. But the company who just sets up now and says, hey, I'm going to set up a kitchen 20 kilometers away or 10 kilometers away from Dublin, and I'm going to deliver food to people, they are actually now at the moment being very successful, or that's my feeling, like, at least in the area where I live. So it's just a matter of, something is going to happen, or if nothing happens, some competition is going to eat you alive. So you better move on, or don't be stuck in the past.
That's true, because I think somehow when you debug a thing, you're actually playing with the fragility of that application.
Yeah.
Every application, it's inevitable. It can get insecure. It can break over a course of time. You might not deploy on a Friday, but you will be sitting on a Saturday and Sunday debugging something. That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's inevitable. That's
You
inevitable.
raise a very interesting point here. There are two reasons for why you don't want to deploy on a Friday. First one is because you are working under a massive, crazy, super high-paced environment, and you want people to have a room to at least, kind of decompress on Friday a bit and then rest the weekend, or because your deployment process is broken. So if it's the first one, it's a very valid point. But if it is the second one, it's a clear indicator that you actually need to need to improve your processes. When I built, well, I didn't build them from scratch. Valerio Barrilla, one of my most talented colleague in the DevOps space, designed the architecture of the contact tracing applications for like, I think it's like 9 countries, which we built a Nearform. We were not doing deployments on Friday, but because we wanted to have some sort of, kind of like, of course, if there was an emergency, we would be the first ones deploying on Friday. But we wanted to have some sort of, like airspace to breathe, because I remember days where we would have done like 17 production deployments in a morning. And that is like, very exhausting. So we don't want to be deploying on Friday and then, having to fix things on Friday evening after being working like 12 hours a day for 4 days. So that to me was a legit reason to not deploy on Fridays. But companies who are like, oh, no, we don't deploy on Fridays because if something goes wrong, we will be the full weekend down to the trenches. Like my question will be like, why don't you just fix your deployment pipeline to make sure that you can roll back in one click? Or, one click, one command, one action. So that is one of the smells on lack of proper automation.
Are some days harder than the others? Because there is a lesson in every chaos that we face, because I think what I feel is system design evolved because of chaos. If there was no chaos and everything was fine, probably Docker would have been invented, or else Docker wouldn't have pioneered the way in which we are talking about the containers today. And Kubernetes would have evolved through the Borg and the Omega DNA, which it still has. It still has Borg and Omega DNA. It still has it, and it's rocking the world with a lot of scalability. It's a go-to solution right now. So I just wanted to know, like, are some days harder than the others? Because there is a lesson in every situation. So how far is the hardness defined when you are in a production environment? So how is that hardness defined? Because we talk about a lot of patching, hot patching, how to reload an application. Because earlier days, it was all about like ghosting the server, making sure that the server is not accessed by anybody and everything is on the go. And what I feel is like we are reducing the complexity, but adding a lot of inevitable causes for failing. Because when you look at somebody, I made a podcast with Rory Preddy, and he told me that DevOps was something like, I write a program, I build it, I install it on a CD, I run it on a server, and I take it out. And that was DevOps. And I feel that somewhere bringing out that complex automation process onto the process which was there, I think that has catered a need for chaos. So I wanted to understand, like, how are we understanding the process of DevOps through chaos? Because that's what the lessons are.
Yeah, I'll give you one very easy example on that. When you talk about containers, like the main lesson is they have to be immutable and they have to be immutable and stateless. So like somebody who is a newcomer to containers will be like, why? I mean, why don't I just go into a container and install the software I need and, that's my production server, which, I mean, that it's a valid point, like that's the traditional servers. But then you go back in the days where, like many of the production issues around the world are caused because of statefulness of servers. So my point is like, you should probably read on why are they stateless and why do they have to be stateless? And, and then the second one is the immutability, which is you build the artifact, and if you need to patch it, you don't patch it, you just go and create a new artifact and deploy it. So these two are a very good example on how chaos has actually transformed the industry or transformed the tools. Like these are to avoid the most common pitfalls, which many people will have. And the pitfalls are like deploy a new version of the application and then find out 2 hours later that you only partially deployed to 1/3 of the servers because you had a bad day, like everybody does. So you need to automate that, and that is being helped by immutability and stateless of containers. I always in college give to my students because like obviously when you get somebody who is starting and you teach them what Kubernetes is, they will be like, oh my God, what is this? This is super complex. And I always give them the same exercise, which is like a number of steps. This is your deployment guide, you have like 7 steps, and each step has a success rate above 80%, usually like 82% success rate, 87% success rate, like 90% success rate. And at the end of the deployment steps, I ask them, what is the overall chance of success if all your steps are at 85% success rate? And everybody will be like, oh, 85 or bigger, or 82 or 87 or 90. But there will be a couple of people who are quiet in the room. So it's like, if you have like 7 steps in a deployment with success rate below 90% and above 80%, you are going to end up on somewhere between like 40 to 60% success rate. So that means every 2 deployments, one of them is going to fail inevitably. And they were like, well, that makes sense. And then I explained that you have 2 options to reduce this or increase the success percentage. One is shorten your script, like, deploying one command, which is what I mentioned before, like one-click rollbacks, or make your steps to be more successful, like above 95%, which is very hard. So, and here's where the rule of 80-20 kicks in. Like 80% of the features will take you 20% of the time, and the last 20% of the features will take you 80% of the time. So here, my approach, or what I think Kubernetes and Docker are doing very well, is that you don't restrain yourself to go to 100% on reliability or 100% on a number of steps. What you do is you have a very limited amount of steps, which are repeatable across companies. So everybody who is using Kubernetes, unless they did something crazy, they will end up doing the exact same thing. So you have 2 or 3 steps, which are well known and well documented and publicly available to everybody on any Kubernetes guide in the world. And those steps are highly successful because you use immutable artifacts like Docker containers. So the only option for you to fail is an application to be broken, which it doesn't, like, it happens anyway, or like a really bad human error, which is, inevitable. So you really reduce all the moving pieces of the deployment with that.
Yeah, when we talk about CI, CD, we talk about tool sets, but I feel it's an inevitable process of people discussing on their own, talking with some beer, talking with some pizza. Like, there is always that one quote notation, like if your problem can't be solved with a meat with a pizza or something, it's not a problem, it's your problem. Like it's a problem of your team. It's a problem of trust. That's what we talk about. So I just wanted to understand, like, what's the quality of culture that we are building? Are you really satisfied by the way which we are building? Because we are now moving more towards, like, GitHub Actions does everything. Like, it does almost of your CI. It does it does everything in CI. It also does the same old deployment. But when we are thinking of like open source, I think it's doing pretty amazing in what we are thinking about. So I just wanted to understand, like, what's the quality of the culture and the software that we are building today? Because Snike has an amazing tool set for security. It does not look at your source code. It just looks at your manifest file, starts building on what is required, what is not required, and what not. Oh my God. I just wanted to understand, like, how are we building a quality culture in the software for today, for sustainability, tomorrow for reliability? What is it all about?
I think it depends a lot on the company, to be honest. Like, some companies are building an amazing culture and some companies are building it completely wrong. So there's one tendency, which I've seen, like, at least now in 6 or 7 projects, is like, Kubernetes manifests are too complex. Let's create our own YAML and grab the Kubernetes manifest on that YAML. So instead of giving you all the options, I give you a subset of the options, and then my tool is going to translate your YAML file into Kubernetes YAML files. And it's like, Kubernetes was designed by Google and was designed by people who has been working in production environments for years. And yet you think you are smarter than them, and you are creating a subset of, the domain-specific language to solve a very complex problem. The companies who go down that route, I don't expect them to succeed or be able to keep and hire the best talent, because you end up in a corner where you don't want to be. The companies who embrace their platform and they are conscious that, I am deploying my software in Kubernetes, in AWS, in Azure, in, Kali, whatever you want, they will do fine, but they need to embrace the platform. So if you are trying to push away into a box the complexity, you are going to fail. If you are trying to embrace that complexity and understand what you don't need, which is more important than what you need, then you will be fine. Like I sometimes I jump into projects which are not moving to any direction. It's like, oh, we want to use machine learning, we want to use AI, we want to use Kubernetes, we want to use this, we want to use Istio. And it's like, do you really need all of that? Like, can you just do away with, deploy your containers in Google Cloud Run or in ECS Fargate or App Service in Azure? And like, realistically, you're just setting things online. You don't need machine learning. You don't need, a complex Kubernetes setup. You just don't need Istio. So you just want to deploy one container, which is going to have an application. Why do you complicate things so much? So that is the type of culture which I think it's coming from software, definitely. Like when I'm coding, I see a lot of over engineering, but when it goes down to infrastructure, it's brutal. Like I've seen some companies spending thousands and thousands and thousands of euros and dollars on things that they don't need, or they need because they poorly design the application or poorly design the system in general. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
interesting. Like
I feel somewhat like a simple Kubernetes CI/CD pipeline for any containerized application probably should never take more than 2 hours if you are setting it for the first time. If you are
oh I
if
yeah,
you are
I always
setting
say
it,
the same.
yeah,
I
because
I
I
can
feel that organizations overthink, complicate stuff, and they come back to a situation which they were there back again, and they think of what's the most simplistic situation. But why not think of
yeah
simplistic situations like before going for some complex topics? Because it doesn't make sense until, because I see like some guy told me like, why don't you deploy through an Argo CD? I'm like, why do you want to add in complexity? GitHub Actions does everything for me. So I just wanted to understand, like, how are we as a human being today manifesting the change that we really require? Because there is a lot and lot of complexity that we talk today, but why are we not keeping it simple? Because talk is so costly today. What do you make a talk is so costly. So I just wanted to
yeah
understand what it is.
I think it's just a hit and miss, to be honest. I think it's some people are like hitting the nail on the head, and some people are like, what are you doing? I mean, why are you doing this so complex? Why are you making this so hard to debug, and why are you making this so hard to operate? So I don't know. I think the problem is, again, it's like the broken kind of chain of delegation. So you have the CTO on a company, and the CTO will tell you, oh, we are doing amazing, everything is working fine, and everything is fantastic. Then you go down to the architect, and it's like, well, we took some bad decisions, but it still works. Then go down to the team lead, and it's like, we spend about 40% of the time fixing technical debt, and we can't fix it because it's brutal and it's rampant. And then you go down to a developer, and it's like, oh, I'm looking for another job because this is unbearable. And that is a problem which is very hard to fix, because the person who has to fix it, which is the top command in the company, does not see it. So like bad decisions on DevOps today might mean that your company is unable to retain people in a year or in 2 years, and you will have a hard time to see it. So usually when I work as a consultant in a company, when I was in Airform and now in Manukau, my first question is, tell to somebody at the very top of the chain, like CTO or as high as you can go, see what's the prospect, and then go to the last developer who jumped into the company and see exactly what are their thoughts, and see if there is a big difference. Usually there is a big difference in the perception on the top versus the perception on the development team. And if there is something called radius, that's your low-hanging fruit. That's what you need to fix. But usually it's complexity. Usually somebody read a document about, or read an article about Istio, and then suddenly thinks, oh, Istio is the best possible thing that we can do. And I'm not talking specifically about Istio, which I think it's amazing. I'm talking about, first of all, why do you need a service mesh? What is going to give you back that you can't actually get from not having a service mesh? The most common answer will be like, oh, end-to-end mutual TLS. And you will be like, well, do you really need that? Because, like you might have other security issues in your architecture, which I'm sure you do because I've seen plenty of them. which are easier to fix and will have a better impact. Like if you have mutual TLS and somebody is able to get, like the most common vulnerability is the CI/CD credentials. So you install CI/CD credentials in CI. Every DevOps engineer has access to that, but they never rotate. So, like if somebody works for a company, gets the CI/CD credentials, quits in 2 years, chances are these credentials are going to be still valid. And that to me is like, it doesn't matter if you have Istio with end-to-end mutual TLS, if you have that level of access available to somebody. So in my point, nowadays, the biggest challenge is manage the complexity and find the most simple solution that is going to actually solve the majority of your requirements, not all of them, because that would probably not be possible even with the complex one, because you don't know the requirements upfront. Doesn't matter how much you try. But complexity itself is the enemy number one today of DevOps and teams that are DevOps enabled.
Yeah, when you think of Netflix architecture,
yes,
they openly say that, it's all about like we hiring some good folks, we just teaching them what it is, and now giving an access to everybody has an access to the production system there. And I read an article on like 5 lessons that we learned by using AWS, and they were like, AWS went down, but we didn't go down because we built an architecture because AWS was not chaotic, but it was architected to something which is required. And there are some case studies like Hotstar and all these, the way they leverage the Kubernetes, the way they leverage the compute resources, the way chaos engineering is being designed. And speaking of that, that is an inevitable factor that there is going to be a breakage somewhere down the line. What if 50 million tsunami hits come in? What if this happens, that happens? So there is a lot. So I wanted to understand like some insights for the secure system architecture, because I don't think DevOps existed because it was all system admin, system engineers job, which was always existed. So I just wanted to understand what are some inevitable facts that we need to learn in order to keep the most secure culture, more secure system design, and everything about the security that we need to learn today.
So the first and foremost is that security needs to be aligned with DevOps. So, and that's to me, like it's outrageous how bad it is in many places. Like if you have security, whose only answer is no, you can't do that, without giving you like, do this instead, that's a problem. Like you are actually building a culture which is just awful, and you are not going to be able to work well. So second is security needs to understand the technology. So like, many companies have some crazy security requirements in production, but then it comes down to containers and they don't understand them. So they don't have the same requirements just because they don't understand them. And that's very dangerous. So you end up building, you remember the Homer Simpson car, which feels like, the best of everything, but doesn't look like a car. So that's what you end up building. Third one is developers, DevOps, and everybody in the supply chain of software needs to understand security. And that is usually very much overlooked. Like many developers or DevOps will have the FUSBIS or FUSBAS interview question of, can you transverse a binary tree on reverse order? Or, like, can you build this crazy algorithm on the interview? But nobody will ask you about security. And it's like, well, it's probably the most important part of a job description for a developer. But in general, I think security needs to be on board with DevOps and needs to be on board with, the technology and processes, because otherwise, like, you are not going to succeed on a DevOps environment if your security is telling you that you can't access to production. So being in places where I need to read the logs through CI, so I need to run a CI job to give me the logs on the email. And that was like so poor because, like, this is going to take me hours to debug something that will take me 30 seconds to give me access to the logs. And the fact that I need to read them via email means that I have access to them. So me not having access to the logs because some reason, it's only preventing me from doing the job, but not preventing me from doing anything wrong. So what's the point? So that's what I mean by understanding security. Like things like, some crazy security policies on patching, like you need to install an agent that needs to report into our inventory every 30 minutes. But then you never patch the Docker images, like you are maybe in Node.js 8 point something. And that to me is like a big, big security issue. And that is one of the things that puts off big companies most often. Something like, we gone into DevOps and we got breach. So we are not doing that again. Like you got breach because your security just decide not to move and decide not to go into DevOps. But if security is aligned with what the modern techniques are, you are set for success. And it is very easy, to be honest. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that your containers are secure, like your Docker images, because everything nowadays, or 90% is based on Docker. Either you run it or somebody else runs a Docker image for you, like Lambda, for example, or a container. So make sure that your images are secure. Make sure that your software supply chain is secure and people has the right access and they don't find workarounds, because there are always workarounds and you don't want people to go there. Like, for example, using the CI/CD credentials in your laptop, like that's bad. And the third one is training. Like people needs to be aware of security issues. Like people needs to be aware of the do's and don'ts to be able to exercise security on the right path. And it's not easy, but hey, this is software. It's not easy anyway. So that's my point. And regarding your point of Netflix, like I've come across many leaders on technology which are like, we are doing the same thing as that Netflix does, which is, squads, access to production, you build it, you run it. And my question is, well, are you able to hire the same type of people that Netflix does? Because I'm sure you don't. And as long as you can't, then it's not going to work, because you need top talent to do something like that. You can't just do that with, people who are like not super experienced developers, DevOps. It's not going to work. It's set for disaster. So if you claim to be Netflix, you need to be Netflix 100%, not only the parts that you like.
Dev Han is one of those guys, they have evangelized how the architecture has to be. And I think 10 deploys per day, I think that talk is, oh my God, amazing.
Yeah.
Like, it's all about that Flickr, how the Yahoo and how they scale that 3 billion plus images, 40,000 plus per second or something. It's evolving. So we talk about open source tools, we talk about premier tools that every company wants to buy, this and that. But when we think of scalable deployment at scale, because we're monitoring an application about like a machine learning model has to be there on your microservice today, or else your product has no value tomorrow, because data needs to be collected, data needs to be engineered, data needs to be trained, data needs to be deployed. Everything, the data flows in and out of an organization. And what's your take on deployment at scale? Because deployment at scale is not that easy, according to me, because everybody has their own definitions. Like DevOps guy has an own definition, developer has an own definition, testing guy always says that, hey, we need some more data, we need some more this, we need some more that.
Yeah.
Like, what's your take on deployment at scale?
Like, look, for example, at the contact tracing, the COVID applications that Nearphone built. I was leading the infrastructure team, and there was one thing that was very clear to me. It's like trust. So you build trust with your team, and you build trust with the people that you work with. And I remember somebody telling in the Slack channel of deployments, like, I'm going to deploy this into X tenants, and nobody will question it, but everybody will be very keen to help, because we trust the person to be capable and able to do it, and trust the person that if that person has an issue, will call us, and everybody will be there to help. So that to me is the first thing that you need. And again, it goes back into DevOps, like it's not only technology, it's also culture, and it's also process. So we will have a very well-defined process and very well-defined monitoring metrics and very well-defined kind of boundaries of what is okay and what is not okay as of behavior of the system. And like I remember, like I went actually on paternity leave amid the COVID storm on the applications, and it all went so smooth because the team was talented and the team was autonomous and responsible, and the scale was global. Like we were looking at something like 9 tenants in like something like 6 or 7 different time zones. So the team was only like 3 or 4 people. I think at the minimum we were like 2 people running the infrastructure, and I think nowadays there's only like 1, or like I don't know exactly. At least it's gonna be the minimum was always 3 because we had the 24/7 coverage. But the team will shrink or grow depending on availability of people, and it won't have an impact on the running system. So that to me is what you need to do to deploy at scale. First and foremost, trust. Second is be able to manage technical depth. So we had a lot of autonomy, and basically we will have a list of technical depth that we would like to fix, and that will get prioritized very quickly, because we know that fixing today like 10% of technical debt is going to give us back 40% of the time that we invest in the system. So to me, it was like a spot on decision in there. And then the third one is trust across the supply chain. So trust from the director at that time, which was Column, which was the one who managed all the contact tracing applications and tenants. Trust in us, trust in the developers today to say, hey, I'm going to do a production deployment now. Please be aware that something might go wrong, and all the infrastructure team will be looking at that. Trust to go and say, hey, I need to get this patch out now because it's actually causing data corruption, and fix it very quickly. And to me, this kind of close-knit culture is the enabler number one for scale deployments. When you have to jump 3 or 4 different hops to get the logs from production from one part of the application that you might need but you are not there, when you need to raise a change request and has to go through like 6 or 7 different people who do not understand the system, that's where you have problems with the scale, because then you don't have the agility that you need. Like to me, like being able to be agile and fix things on the spot, to me is like the number one reason to, like, number one enabler to global deployments and big scale deployments. And we're talking about a pretty big systems. Like we're talking about, I don't know exactly the number of requests, but we're talking over 100 million requests per day. So that is already a pretty big system. So yeah.
Yeah, I think we pretty much covered everything on DevOps, because it's all about like it's all about that. It's all about like you not hiring the best of what Netflix can offer. Also, you also need
Yeah.
somebody who can actually pioneer a culture, because that's what DevOps is all about. It's not like,
Yeah.
okay, we discuss something, we buy the license for the tools, we get this, we get that. It's never going to work. And
Yeah.
I just want your insights on some books, tips and tricks for the new age DevOps guys, because a lot of times, it's not just reading books. It's not about doing the hands-on stuff. It's beyond that. I can't explain what DevOps is in a day, because
Yeah.
I'm no big of a professional here, but I feel it's huge, humongous
Yeah.
actually. So what's your take on the best books and best
There is
things to follow as an individual?
one book I would recommend to everybody, and it's not my book. It's Accelerate. You mentioned it before. Like anybody who is a leader or somebody on DevOps position, even developers as well, and like anybody who is in tech should read Accelerate. It is aging not so well, but it's still has many valid points. So you need to understand, like, what Accelerate brings to you. And that will be probably the only book that you need to start understanding the DevOps path or the DevOps culture. From the technical standpoint, I don't think you really need to get too attached into books itself, but there is something I would recommend to everybody who wants to get into the DevOps cloud ladder, which is read the well-architected frameworks for AWS, for Azure, and I think Google has renamed them. I don't remember the name, and it's the same. It's the well-architected framework, but it's called now cloud engineering or something like that. Read them, because every cloud manages their own infrastructure differently. And if you understand the well-architected framework, you are more than likely to have all the tools you need to pass any interview and to build the system on the right way. What technology you use, yes, that's a different subject, but as long as they fit in the well-architected frameworks, you will be fine. So well-architected frameworks and Accelerate, and you're good to go. Get a free account in AWS, Azure, or GCP, which they give you plenty of free services. Get CDK, Terraform fired off. Do some proof of concepts here and there, and a couple of projects down the line, you probably will be riding the wave. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for great insights that you threw up to the world today, because it's what is required. It's what DevOps culture is all about. So if you look at the scientists in the DevOps, they all talk like it's Deming, it's this, it's that guy who influenced, it's an electronics and a statistician who discovered some new lean, agile, scrum management manifestos and things like that. I think this was great. Thank you so much for giving such a wonderful insights on my
Thank
podcast.
you very
And
much.
yeah, it was great talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me, Vishwas.
Yes.